All right. I hope everyone's doing well. Good. Yeah. Been working on a lot of stuff that won't be for you guys for this week, but will be for you guys for next week. Um, some really cool stuff that I think you guys will really enjoy. All righty. Okay, grab my coffee and then I'm ready to start. So, be back in 1 sec.
Hey, everybody. While Richard is getting his coffee, I want to share that today is my wife's birthday, and it's also our 20th wedding anniversary.
Oh, wow.
Hey,
And
congratulations.
you see how great she is? She's letting me be here with you guys.
Wow. That is commitment.
That's a special lady.
Yeah. For sure. All right. All right, let's put this into, there we go. All right. And let's go like this. Do this there. Cool. All right. Now I can, let's do the chat there. Oh, happy birthday, James, as well. 2 birthdays. Yeah, I hope that the extra week helped you guys, that it gave you guys a chance to catch up. The other group wanted it, and I got, it's really interesting when I'm working, just before I even like show some slides here. With the first cohort, like they really helped define for me a lot of the stuff that you guys are going through. Because I had a lot of preconceived notions about how I was going to do the course before, like there was actually anybody specific in the program. But then as I started working with people, I kind of got a sense of what I needed to do differently than what I had originally thought. And so based on that, right, that like my maneuvering around them, and I, had to make sure that I got everyone to the outcome that they wanted, which, makes it easier for me to get you guys to the outcome. So that's cool. But, when creating some of these massive prompts, it's kind of crazy that sometimes I can spend like 3, 4, or 5 hours developing a prompt and get to the end of those 3, 4, or 5 hours and not have a prompt, just have a lot of wasted time. Sometimes, I'm able to generate the prompt very quickly. Other times, many hours and nothing, and then sometimes many hours and I do have a prompt that works perfectly. It's very different when I'm writing a prompt for myself, where I can just instruct it to take certain things, and a prompt that will work on everyone's system and pull out what's relevant on everyone's system. And so that's where a lot of the challenge sometimes comes. So after several days in a row of like many hours and not getting the output that I wanted, I thought I'd give everyone a break, because I needed a break like desperately, because I wanted to throw my computers through the wall. I was sending to my friends and team members, some team members, my cursing going back and forth with ChatGPT, and my insulting it and my telling it that its apologies mean absolutely nothing to me. So yeah, it was a fun experience. But it was useful to go through all that, because actually I figured out other ways to avoid that going forward. Some other set of instructions that I'll share with you guys that'll actually be in some of your prompts next week. So, all right, let's dive in. Let me share. And
Rich, there's something on the bottom of your chin, or either that's an illusion of the camera. Yeah, it's still there.
Still there?
Yeah.
Let's see. It's totally possible. I noticed that right before I started, I hadn't shaved.
It
So
could be shaving cream or something.
yeah, it could be shaving cream. It could be a cut. I'll ask Jessica real quick
All
here.
right. I didn't want you looking different. That's all.
All right. If I start bleeding, it's my own fault. All right, there we go. Let's move this over here, I guess. Yeah, there we go. All right, so, we had the God prompt the first week, the omniscient observer in week 2, and now as we go into the third phase, right, this is all about expansion. And some of you have already heard me talk about this, but about the need for expansion, but we'll kind of revisit that in this quick presentation about it all. So let's kind of dive in here. All right, so progress track. Okay, so before we expand, let's measure how well AI knows you so far. So that's the first prompt. You'll run a 3-part progress check prompt that reveals what ChatGPT knows about you, how well it knows you, category by category, and questions to reflect on, insights, and advice. So when I ran the progress check on me, it gave me these pages. I actually use this in the webinar, so you might have seen it in the webinar, especially that third page, where it is ranking me to every other ChatGPT user, and whether it knows me better or worse than, or far better, just a little bit better, etc., and why, and what it would need to know to get to a better rating. So you'll run that prompt, and it will be a very good, kind of picture of what it's learned about you, which will be very useful to use in any other AI, although that won't be the final AI signature profile, but it will be something useful for you right then and there. Also, next week or next phase, there'll be something similar to this, right? That will be all the deltas. So from when you first started to where you are next week, what are the changes that ChatGPT has noticed in you over the last 4 weeks? But for this one, we're just looking at what does it know about you and where you're at with that, comparatively. So that's that, and you'll get that prompt. So now that you've seen the truth and you've confronted the patterns, that's what the omniscient observer was all about, right? Now it's really time to become who you've always felt you could be. It's about expanding your perspective. It's about thinking about your strengths as bigger things than maybe you've thought about them in the past. And it's about dreaming bigger dreams about what's truly possible. So lesson 1 revealed your reflection. Lesson 2 hopefully started helping you shatter some of those illusions that are holding you back, that are keeping you somewhat trapped, right? So now lesson 3 is about rebuilding your reality. It's about having you see things from the perspective that you probably had when you were younger, before you got saddled up with a lot of these false narratives, limiting beliefs, and all the other kind of head trash that oftentimes just causes conflict, gets in our way, and has us not perform at our best. So this is, you could say, really where your real evolution begins, right? Because we're going to be, ideally, if it resonates deeply, it doesn't just sound good, it actually impacts your identity, right? Not as who you've been, which has been the first 2 lessons, right? Who you've been, but much more about who you must become to really have the life that you want. So it's no longer your mirror. We're moving out of that stage, right? It's no longer your challenger. We're moving out of that stage. You can always revisit those stages. You can always ask it to, to tell you what it sees in you, to challenge those things. But in this lesson, what we're talking about is expansion, right? About helping you see what's possible. All right. It's helping you, I apologize because, because I'm talking to different groups, sometimes I'm concerned that I might say something for the 5th time. So I apologize in advance if this is one of those things, but even if it is one of those things, I think it's useful to mention it. When I was invited to speak at this event in Arizona, like several years ago. Diamond Day was the name of it. And they asked me to talk about risk. And I didn't really know what to talk about as far as risk goes, because I don't really think of myself as someone who takes lots of risks. But then I thought about how other people might perceive like the decisions I've made, and that some of them could be risky. And so then I started thinking about, why do I not think they're risky? And maybe other people do. And that then gave me a lot of stuff that I could actually talk about in that presentation. And one of the things that I talked about that I had learned from Werner Erhard was the difference between how you wound up being and who you really are, right? Like that, like how we find ourselves in the current moment very often is how we wound up being. Just life happened and this is what occurred, as opposed to really being much more conscious in the matter and have more choice in the matter of who we can become. And that a lot of people make the mistake of thinking how they wound up being is who they really are. And when I mentioned that in that presentation, that seemed to really resonate deeply with a lot of people. They had a lot of questions about that difference between how they wound up being versus who they really are. And this kind of gets at that same thing. And if you, depending on which webinar you were on, because I put this in this lesson, and then once I put it in the lesson, I was like, oh, this really should go in the webinar. But I remember this book, like, you know, I'm a voracious reader. I read like 3 or 4 books a week, and I came across this book and I read it and I loved it. I don't remember if this was the first book of his or not that I read, but whatever book of his I read the first one of, I think he, you know, this is an old book, a long time ago. It was written. This guy's been dead for a long time, David Seabury, I think. But I read one of his books and I liked it, so I bought all of his books, which is generally what I do if I like an author. And when I read this, I remember like reading this book and it positively haunting me. And you know, when Jay Abraham called me that night, like I remember reading this passage to him, it just meant something to me, right? This idea that when we were younger, we had these big, big dreams of what life would be like as an adult, and we felt this impulse of inner powers. We saw ourselves sometime in our adulthood being brilliantly successful, conspicuous in our work, at the top of our profession, rich, with many friends, happily married, having a fine home, having wonderful kids. And we really believed in ourselves back then, right? That the early confidence made the day glorious, and we sprang out of bed eager to experience life. But that life has a way of beating us up and undermining us at times. And that if there's no one there to kind of help us not internalize those things, oftentimes they do get internalized, and there's a layer of self-distrust that develops. And so I remember reading this and just thinking about how much the dreams that I had as a child had shrank, and how he was really talking to people like myself. And I really reflected on that quite a bit, you know, because it wasn't a conscious choice ever that my dreams got smaller. It wasn't like I had consciously decided. I just started settling for less and less and less, accepting less and less and less, until the dreams got smaller and smaller, right? You know, like when I did the Wheel of Life, I gave myself like really high scores, even when I was in the throes of my midlife crisis. And that's the part that I didn't understand, you know, like, why was I giving myself high scores if I was not happy? But what I realized is that the criteria I was using was criteria that was not the same criteria that I would have used 20 or 30 years ago. Like I had, you know, I've been divorced for about, I got separated about 14 years ago. And I gave my relationship like an 8, an 8.5, and I gave it an 8.5 because we never argued. My ex-wife let me come and go as I please. Like, I just like had a very no conflict, no frustration life. But when I thought about when I was younger, was that the dream? Like, I hope I get married someday for a wife who doesn't bother me and lets me come and go as I please. And like, no, that wasn't what, but that I was giving myself an 8.5, like, because like, that's what we had. And that was so not the dream of what like a great marriage was. But somewhere along the lines, like it had been redefined from this great thing, like me and a partner, like taking on the world and doing wonderful things together to, well, as long as, she doesn't bother me. All right. So that to me is a representation of like this resignation that just happens through life, that we have these dreams and our dreams get smaller and smaller over time. And what we want to do in this phase is really make sure that if we've done that, that we have the opportunity to reset and to begin to dream bigger dreams. Because I know for me, that is a core driver in my performance. If I'm excited about the outcome, I work a lot harder and it's a lot easier for me to work. And I'm a lot more excited to work if I'm excited about where we're headed than if we're just headed someplace. So, I use something like this in the webinar about, this retrenching, right? That like as a child, you thought you could change the world, right? And then somehow over time, we go from wanting to change the world to maybe, changing society, to an organization, to a relationship, to our family, to a group of community, to maybe at some point we're like, I don't even know if I can change myself, right? So we dream big, we dream of big impact, big energy, but then life teaches many of us to shrink, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, right? And that shrinking affects us in the way we make decisions, in the way we believe what's possible, what's not possible, and therefore in our creativity, and then ultimately in our impact. Because if we don't think we can have a big impact, then we're certainly not aiming for it. So, it's not something that you really have to explore too deeply, because as we go through this phase, we'll see, like based on what ChatGPT sees as possible for you. So we don't have to like identify the setbacks that became the stories or the stories that became the identity, right? And the identity that becomes a cage. But there are parts of each and every one of our identities that holds us back in some way, shape, or form. So to expand also starts from within and, elevates outward. So what we're doing here in this phase is really to help alter your identity by looking at what's truly possible. And you'll know that it's making its impact when you see things differently in the way you make decisions, in the ideas that you come up with, and even in your relationships. People noticed when I went through this process that people seemed like I was in a good place when I saw them. That, and I think it had a lot to do with this. So we're reclaiming that expansion, right? Not as like some kind of fantasy, but as an actual functional identity, because that who you really are never left, right? It just got like overtaken by how you wound up being. And you just stopped listening to that deeper part of you, that part of you that was that childlike spirit. The universal expander. So the universal expander is in the same vein as what the God prompt and the omniscient observer was, as far as like it's the core of this module. There are 3 cores in this module. Next one will have even more cores, but there are 3 core prompts in this module. The progress check is not one of them. That's just one to kind of, you know, see where you're at with stuff. But this one is that multi-page output that is all about what's possible and the strengths that will get you there, now named and isolated as to why. So you could think of it as it's the part of you that all of the limiting beliefs and all of the false narratives and false assumptions have been trying to protect, right? Because if you really believe that, you might, you know, you might take risks, right? It certainly isn't the safest version, but it is the most powerful one. And it is the one that threatens your old identity. All right, so we're mirror, challenge, expand. That's what we're in this, we're in the expand now. And each document that you've outputted builds upon the last one to create this identity transformation. So, you know, the God prompt went to the omniscient observer. And now we're going to take the God prompt and the omniscient observer to create